The overwhelming majority of vehicles that we've discussed in Unsung Heroes tend to be, if you will, relatively open and shut cases. It's a vehicle which tried to achieve something, maybe a race, a series, a speed record, maybe even just reaching production in some cases, and chances are it probably failed. It's a justifiable reason for falling into obscurity. On other occasions, though, you have a car which maybe did achieve what it wanted to do, and is still, for whatever reasons, forgotten. A unicorn, sometimes. Then occasionally you have a car which doesn't really fit into any of those boxes, and to me this is one of them, because I'm not talking about this car because of what race it did or didn't win, what speed it can or can't do, or even because it necessarily has the most intriguing story behind it. The reason why I'm talking about it is because of its design, because when you first saw the thumbnail for this video and decided to click on it, chances are you thought to yourself, oh yeah, I recognise that car, it's a Ford GT in some kind of racing form. Maybe a racing form that you haven't seen before, or maybe a racing form that you have seen, maybe in a Google search, and didn't think much of it. But then you looked at the title of the video, and if you haven't already, I would ask you to do so now, because this is not a Ford GT, it's called the VBM 4000 GTC. And although that may pique your interest, there's far more to this vehicle than just not having Ford GT in its name. Sometimes stuff like that can happen. You know, a certain company might buy a chassis, maybe some bodies, and turn it into their own thing. In this series, we've even discussed cars like that. The Gunnar G99, for instance. Totally different name. Ford is essentially a modified Porsche 911 GT1. So it's happened before in this same series. But the reason why this car is so fascinating to me is because not only is this not a Ford GT, this car came out in 1995. Now that, to me, is mind-blowing, because not only is it not built by Ford, this predates the Ford GT by a decade. How is that even possible? How could this car, which clearly looks so much like a Ford GT to the point where there is no way it's an accident? The door cutouts of the roof, the windows, especially the side windows, the headlights, the body shape, everything except the back end is pure Ford GT. And yet, not only is it 10 years older, not only is it not a Ford, it's not even American. This was built in France for the French GT series by two guys by the name of Patrick Borhauser and Jean-Francois Metz. The vehicle uses essentially the same motor setup as a Venturi 400 GT, which, if I recall correctly, I believe actually participated in a similar series, if not the same one, and that is of course a 3-litre twin-turbo V6 from Peugeot with just over 400 horsepower. It has a tube frame design with a combination of carbon fibre, aluminium and fiberglass body parts, and it went racing. 5-speed gearbox. I believe it had some mixed success, not overwhelmingly capable, but not a failure by any stretch either, as far as I could tell. But it really is that design that makes no sense to me. Now, the thing that really stands out about the design, more so even than the Ford GT aspect, is that the back end doesn't fit the rest. It's nothing like a Ford GT. It looks like it was taken off of a Vector instead, and it even has the rear lights from a Fiat Brava, of all things. So it's a parts bin special to some degree, but there's a difference between being a parts bin special and being 10 years older than what you'd think it took the parts from. Now, I don't think there's necessarily some grand Illuminati-level conspiracy going on here, but I do find it curious how little information there is about why this looks so similar, because there is no way you can tell me that it was by accident. And I'm not necessarily saying that this car is the one to quote-unquote blame, if you will. I think it's without question that Ford clearly looked at this car when they designed the GT, but I think the only justifiable explanation that I can think of is that this actually was not, of course, some time travel paradox of a Ford GT creating itself, but rather was probably inspired by the GT40. And of course that does make sense of a lot of this car's design, considering that the new Ford GT was itself designed to be a modern interpretation of a GT40. So justifiably, they did a similar thing probably when designing this car. They were fans of the Ford, they probably wanted to make an homage to it. It wasn't like Ford was racing a GT40 in the 90s anyway, so who would have cared? They would have had no idea about Ford planning the GT down the line anyway, but I do find it interesting just how similar it was. And one of the biggest cues that this car has that is almost identical, if not identical, to the production GT from around 2005 is the side windows. That particular curve around where the door handle is nothing like a GT40. It has none of the shape of the original. It's an almost exact match to the new Ford GT. Now, it is possible, I mean, it's such a slim chance, but it is possible that Ford was not aware of this car. But I don't believe that for a second. I think that they absolutely knew about this car. I believe that they probably even took some cues from it when designing the GT, because it is a Ford GT. I mean, I don't care what anyone says, it is so similar that it's just crazy. And ultimately, even though I wish I could tell you more things about it conclusively in terms of that design, I do think that the design alone is more than enough reason to feature it in this series. In fact, it feels almost like it deserves an Unsolved Mysteries episode rather than an Unsung Heroes episode. Now, ultimately, the car was later decommissioned for racing. It was converted to road use. That was in 2002. And I find it interesting that the car doesn't get talked about more as well, because there are a number of people who have, of course, pointed out the similarities. You could not see this car and not immediately think Ford. And yet it doesn't seem to be as talked about and as much of an internet meme as I would have thought it would be. I mean, this car is a drivable meme of a Ford GT, except really the Ford is a meme of this because this came first. So it's just a fascinating little vehicle, which to me almost feels like this weird, eerie, shouldn't exist kind of scenario where this car seems like it's out of time somehow. But yeah, I probably find it more fascinating than many people would. As I said, there's not much chatter about the car on the internet, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the design of the car? Do you think it's just me, or do you see those similarities as well? And of course, if you are a fan of Unsung Heroes, or maybe if you're brand new to the series, I would recommend clicking the link down below, jumping over to the Discord community chat for this channel, and apart from the fact that you can have a lot of great discussions over there anyway, we have a specific dedicated voting poll for every single episode of Unsung Heroes that we've done so far, and I add each new one in there as well, so this one will be there, of course. And then once we reach episode 100, we're going to be counting down the community's 10 favourite cars that we've spoken about so far. So this one could be in there if enough of you vote for it, of course, so jump over there, vote on your favourites, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.